He didn't even look back. That's the part Simone couldn't stop replaying in her mind, not the lie, not the perfume that clung to his collar like a confession, not even the words he had chosen to cut her down with. It was the moment Vincent Cross buttoned his coat, glanced at his phone, and walked out the door on Christmas Eve, while his 7 months pregnant wife stood barefoot in the kitchen, watching the dinner she'd spent 6 hours making go cold on the table. He didn't look back, not once, and somewhere across Manhattan, a fireplace was already burning. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror, this story is for you. If you've ever been made to feel like your pain was the problem, not the person who caused it, stay with us. Because what Simone did next, what she discovered, and who she became on the other side of the worst Christmas of her life, is something none of us should miss. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And while you're watching, drop a comment telling us what city or country you're joining us from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Your likes and comments mean everything, and they keep these stories alive. Now let's go back to where it all began. Simone Avery Cross was not a woman who cried easily. She had learned that somewhere between her third round of IVF and the second miscarriage, somewhere between holding a negative pregnancy test in a cold bathroom at 2 in the morning and walking back into the bedroom with her face composed, because she didn't want Vincent to feel guilty again. She had learned to hold things, to compress them, to file the grief somewhere internal and professional, the way she used to file quarterly reports sorted, labeled, contained. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, with a boy they had already named Noah, and she was standing at the window of their penthouse on the 41st floor of a building that cost more per month than most people made in a year, watching snowflakes drift past the glass like they had nowhere urgent to be. She envied them that. The dinner was still on the table. She'd made his mother's roast chicken. The one she'd spent 3 months learning to cook correctly, with the lemon and the thyme tucked under the skin the way his grandmother used to do it. She'd found the recipe herself, called his Aunt Patricia in Georgia to verify the proportions, made it twice before tonight, just to make sure it was right. The candles had burned down to stubs. The good plates, the ones they only used for family occasions, still sat in their careful arrangement, untouched. Vincent had not eaten a single bite before he left. She heard his phone buzz 3 times while they were sitting across from each other. She watched him glance at it and set it face down, but not before she caught the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers pressed just slightly too hard against the screen. She'd been watching him do that for 6 months. She knew exactly what that jaw tightening meant. She just hadn't been ready to say it out loud. "The Midtown property," he'd said, standing up from the table and reaching for his coat on the back of the chair. "There's an issue with the HVAC system. The whole 7th floor is flooding." Simone's didn't move. "On Christmas Eve," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "These things don't wait for holidays, Simone." His voice had that particular edge to it, not anger. Not quite. More like a man who has already decided that the inconvenience in front of him is the fault of whoever is nearest. "I'll be back in a few hours." "In a few hours," she repeated. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. The candles were reflected in the window behind him, 2 small orange flames floating in the dark. Outside, the city sparkled the way it always did in December, indifferent and beautiful and completely unaware of the particular silence, expanding between a husband and his pregnant wife in a penthouse 41 floors above the street. "Go spend Christmas with her," Simone said. The room went very still. Vincent's hands stopped moving on the coat buttons. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face had rearranged itself into something she recognized, that particular expression he used in board meetings, when someone said something that inconvenienced him, a kind of careful, controlled neutrality that barely concealed the irritation underneath. "What did you say?" "You heard me." "Simone." He said her name the way you say a word you're tired of pronouncing. "You are 7 months pregnant, and you are not sleeping enough, and whatever you think you heard or saw or—" "I didn't hear anything," she said. "I read it." He blinked. "The tablet," she said quietly. "The one we share." "The one your assistant sent a message to. while you were in the shower. She watched his face and saw the exact moment the calculation happened behind his eyes. She said the fireplace was ready. She said she wished you could stay until morning. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Simone had ever heard. Vincent set his jaw. And this was the part that would stay with her for months afterward, the part she would describe to her therapist, with her voice still shaking, he made a choice. He chose not to apologize. He chose not to sit back down. He chose not to reach for her hand, or say her name differently, or do any of the things a man does when he has been caught and still loves the person who caught him. Instead, he straightened his coat collar and said, "You've been under an enormous amount of stress. The pregnancy has been difficult, and I understand that. But you cannot look at a message without context and decide that you know." "Don't," Simone said, one word, quiet as a door closing. "What it means. Tessa works for me. She sends messages at all hours. That's her job. And the fact that you're interpreting it as something. Don't you dare," she said. And her voice was still quiet, but something in it changed. Something went hard and clear the way a river goes clear in winter. And Vincent heard it because he stopped talking. "Don't you stand in this apartment on Christmas Eve with your coat on and tell me that I'm too stressed to understand what I read. Don't make my pregnancy the reason I'm wrong. Don't do that to me." He looked at her. She looked back. For one moment, she thought she saw something move across his face, something that might have been shame or grief, or a recognition of what was actually happening in this room. But it was gone so quickly, she couldn't be certain it had ever been there. "I'll be back in a few hours," he said, and he left. Simone stood still for a very long time after the door clicked shut. She could hear the refrigerator humming. She could hear the faint sound of Christmas music. From somewhere in the building, a neighbor's television or radio playing something cheerful and completely inappropriate for this moment. She could feel Noah moving inside her, small deliberate kicks against her ribs, his own quiet assertion that he was still there, still present, still counting on her to hold everything together. She sat down at the table. She looked at the food she'd made. And then she cried. She hated that, she cried. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding something for 6 months, not gracefully, not quietly, but with the whole body involved, her shoulders shaking, her breath coming in rough, uneven pieces. One hand pressed flat against her belly where Noah was moving. She cried for the dinners she'd eaten alone while Vincent was at late meetings. She cried for the prenatal appointment he'd canceled twice. She cried for the perfume she'd pretended not to smell on 3 separate occasions. She cried for the version of herself that had been so convinced that if she was patient enough, understanding enough, composed enough, things would correct themselves, the way markets correct themselves given sufficient time. She had treated her marriage like a financial instrument. She had expected it to behave rationally. When she was done, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and sat up straight. Her eyes were swollen and her chest hurt, and she still had dinner to put away. She was nothing if not practical. That was when she found the box. It was sitting on the 3rd shelf of the hall closet, pushed behind a stack of Vincent's old investment files, the kind of place you only reach when you're looking for something else. Simone had been reaching for the storage container she used for leftover roasting pans. Her hand found the wooden corner of something solid instead. She pulled it out. It was a small box, maybe 12 inches long, made of dark wood worn smooth at the corners. She recognized it vaguely. She'd seen it on a shelf in Vincent's home office once, maybe twice, and when she'd asked about it, he'd said it was his father's. And his tone had been the kind of tone that ended conversations, so she'd never asked again. Charles Cross had died 18 months before Simone and Vincent met. She knew him only through photographs, a large, quiet-looking man with Vincent's jawline and kind eyes, who had built the first Cross Meridian property with $60,000 and a loan from his church community. The company Vincent now controlled like a personal empire had begun as something modest and human. Simone had always found that detail quietly moving in the way that origins are always more honest than what things eventually become. She set the box on the kitchen counter. She was not going to open it. She was absolutely not going to open it. It wasn't hers to open, and she was in a fragile state, and the responsible thing to do was put it back and deal with one crisis at a time. She opened it. Inside, a fountain pen, capped and old, the kind with a gold nib that had been used long enough to leave a slight impression on the grip. A brass key, small, the kind that might open a safety deposit box, or a desk drawer, or something else entirely. And beneath both of these, folded with the particular care of someone who believed the contents mattered, a handwritten letter. The paper was cream-colored and slightly stiff. The handwriting was deliberate, the hand of someone who had learned to write, when penmanship still meant something. The salutation at the top read, "Dear Margaret." Simone read the first 3 sentences. Then she read them again. Charles Cross wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he knew sorry wasn't sufficient. He wrote that there were things he had failed to do in his lifetime, that he was asking, begging. He actually used the word begging, whoever found this letter to do in his name. And then he wrote about Margaret Vale. He wrote about the daughter no one in his family had ever been told about. He wrote about a promise he'd made and broken. He wrote, in the careful handwriting of a man who understood he was running out of time, that Vincent must not be allowed to erase her from this family again. Again. The word landed like a stone in still water. Again implied it had already happened once. Simone lowered the letter very slowly. She stood in her kitchen on Christmas Eve with snowflakes pressing silently against the window, and her roast chicken growing cold on the table, and her husband somewhere across the city in a firelit apartment that wasn't theirs. And she felt the specific sensation of a floor shifting under her feet, even though she was standing perfectly still. This was not only about infidelity. Something else was buried here. Something older and more deliberate than a man who had stopped loving his wife carefully enough to hide it. She set the letter down on the counter beside the box. Then she picked up the brass key. She turned it over in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. She thought about Vincent's face when he'd found the box on his desk once, how quickly he'd moved it, how his voice had changed when he said, "It's my father's," in that tone that closed doors. She thought about the fact that this box had been in their closet, behind his files, where she would never have found it if she hadn't been reaching blindly in the dark for a storage container on Christmas Eve, because her husband had left her alone again. She thought about Margaret Vale, whoever she was, and what it meant to be erased from a family by someone who had the power and the lawyers to make the erasure stick. Simone folded the letter carefully. She placed it back in the box. Then she walked to the bedroom, pulled her hospital bag out. From under the bed, she'd packed it 2 weeks ago, the way her doctor had recommended, because at 7 months, you pack it just in case, and she began adding things to it. Financial documents from the home safe, her laptop, her own personal bank account information, the account she'd kept in her own name because her mother had told her to, because her mother was a practical woman who had seen enough of the world to understand as bam that a woman's own account is not. This is preparation. She added the letter. She added the key. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and called a car. She was not crying anymore. There was something specific that happened inside Simone Avery Cross on the night of December 24th when she finally accepted, in the particular clean and devastating way, that you accept an unpleasant mathematical truth that the version of her marriage she had been protecting did not actually exist. The thing she'd been so careful not to shatter with her suspicion had already been broken. Had been broken for months. She had simply been the last one to stop, pretending it was whole. She didn't leave because she was emotional. She left because she had spent 6 years building her instincts into something reliable, had spent six years as a financial analyst learning how to identify the difference between a temporary irregularity and a structural problem, and every single instrument she possessed was telling her the same thing at the same volume. This was structural. She called her college friend Denise to say she'd be in the car for a few hours and not to worry. She did not call her mother. Her mother would have told her to come home immediately and would have been right. And Simone wasn't ready to be right yet. She needed one night to be in motion, to be going somewhere, to be doing something with her hands and her body, and the furious, quiet intelligence that Vincent had just finished underestimating for the last time. When Vincent returned the next morning, Christmas morning, just past 7, smelling of wood smoke and a perfume that had been on his collar 3 times before and that Simone had chosen 3 times before not to name, he found the penthouse silent. He found the dinner plates, wash stacked, and the candles removed. He found his wife's wedding ring sitting in the curve of an ornament hook on the lowest branch of the Christmas tree, where she'd placed it like a period at the end of a sentence. And he found his father's box on the kitchen counter. Open, empty. He stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. He stood there the way a man stands, when the thing he thought he was managing has quietly moved out from under his hands in the night. The apartment felt different without her in it. Smaller, somehow, which was strange because she was one person, and it was a 3,000 square foot penthouse. But that's the thing about the presence of someone who truly knows you. It fills space that furniture and square footage can't account for. He picked up his phone. He called her number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He set his phone on the counter and looked at the empty box and thought about the brass key and the letter he had put in there 7 months ago when he found it in his father's things, and decided very deliberately, the way he made all his decisions, with full awareness of what he was choosing, that some things were better left managed than resolved. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them flat against the marble countertop. Somewhere below him, the city was celebrating Christmas morning, and his pregnant wife was gone, and his father's letter was gone with her. And the thing he'd spent 3 years quietly and carefully constructing the particular version of his life in which Vincent Cross was always the one who controlled how the story ended, it just developed a complication he hadn't anticipated. He called his attorney. Then he put the phone down. Then he picked it up again and called Simone one more time. 4 rings. Voicemail. He stood at the window where she'd been standing the night before, looking out at a city wrapped in snow and Christmas morning light, and for just a moment, in the privacy of a room with no audience and no board members, and no strategists and no one to perform composure, for Vincent Cross understood with perfect clarity exactly what he had done. The moment passed. He called his attorney back. The drive to Vermont took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Simone knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard the entire way, not because she was tracking the time, but because she needed something to look at that wasn't the dark highway or her own face in the rearview mirror. The car service driver, a quiet man named Gerald who smelled faintly of coffee and had a small photograph of 2 children taped to his dashboard, did not ask her a single question. She was grateful for that, in a way she couldn't have articulated. Some kindnesses are just the absence of noise. She sat in the back seat, with her hospital bag wedged against the door and Charles Cross's letter folded inside the inner pocket of her coat against her chest, where she could feel the slight stiffness of the paper every time she breathed in. Noah moved twice during the first hour. She put her hand on her belly and didn't say anything to him, just felt the pressure of his small foot or elbow or knee pushing back against her palm. That ancient, wordless conversation between a mother and a child who hasn't arrived yet. She had an address. The letter had contained one, tucked at the very bottom of the final paragraph, almost like an afterthought, or like a man who wanted to make sure whoever found this would know exactly where to go. Margaret Vale, Clearwater Books, Millhaven, Vermont. Charles had written the address in the same deliberate cursive as the rest of the letter, with no further explanation, as if the address itself was all the instruction anyone should need. Simone had looked it up on her phone while sitting in the penthouse elevator going down. A small independent bookstore, a website that was clearly maintained by one person who updated it sporadically and with genuine affection photos of hand-lettered signs, staff recommendation cards pinned to shelves, a note about extended holiday hours that ended with "come in out of the cold." She had looked at that line for a long time. Then she'd gotten in Gerald's car. She didn't know what she was going to say when she got there. She hadn't thought that far ahead, which was unlike her, which told her more about her own state of mind than she wanted to examine right now. The analyst in her, the part that had spent 10 years building financial models and stressing assumptions, was screaming that she was operating on incomplete information and that driving 4 hours to Vermont on Christmas Eve to find a woman she'd never met was not a rational response to the situation. The rest of her, the part that had read the words, Vincent must not be allowed to erase her again, and felt something slot into place. Like the last number in a combinations, Locke said she was exactly where she needed to be. She arrived in Millhaven just before midnight. The town was the kind of small New England place that looks like someone built it specifically to appear in photographs: white church, steeple, snow on every roofline, a main street that was 3 blocks long and dark at this hour, except for the Christmas lights strung between the old street lamps. She had Gerald drop her at the only inn she'd found online, a 7-room place run by an older woman named Pat, who came to the door in a bathrobe and didn't ask any questions about why a visibly pregnant woman was arriving alone at midnight on Christmas Eve. She gave Simone room 4. She brought her a cup of chamomile tea without being asked. Simone sat on the edge of the bed and drank it and looked at the wooden beams on the ceiling and tried to sleep. She managed 3 hours. In the morning, she put on her coat and walked 3 blocks to Clearwater Books. The sign in the window said, "Closed Christmas reopening deck 26th," but there was a light on inside, visible through the gap in the curtains, warm and yellow and unmistakably inhabited. Simone stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The cold was the particular Vermont kind, dry and absolute, that got into the seams of things. She could feel it at her wrists, where her coat cuffs didn't quite meet her gloves. She knocked. Nothing happened for long enough that she almost turned away. Then the curtain in the window shifted and someone looked out at her. She could see the silhouette, roughly the silhouette, a woman, and then the curtain fell back, and there was the sound of a deadbolt turning. The door opened. The woman standing in the doorway was somewhere in her mid-30s, with Charles Cross's jawline and Vincent's eyes set in a face that belonged entirely to neither of them. She was wearing a heavy sweater and her hair was pulled back, and she was looking at Simone with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. "I'm not buying anything," the woman said. "I'm closed." "I'm not selling anything," Simone said. "My name is Simone Cross. My husband is Vincent Cross." She watched the woman's face. "I found my father-in-law's letter." The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Margaret Vale stepped back from the door and let her in. The inside of Clearwater Books smelled like old paper and coffee, and the particular warmth of a space that someone actually lives inside rather than merely maintains. Books were everywhere, not chaotically, but with the organized density of someone who genuinely believed every shelf had a right to be full. There was a small space heater behind the counter, a half-drunk mug of coffee, and a stack of receipts that Margaret had clearly been working through before Simone knocked. Margaret didn't offer her a seat immediately. She stood behind the counter with her arms crossed and looked at Simone the way you look at someone who might be dangerous, which Simone recognized, which she didn't take personally. "How far along are you?" Margaret asked. 7 months. Margaret's eyes moved to Simone's belly and then back to her face. Something shifted in her expression, not quite softening, but recalibrating. "You drove from Manhattan." "Yes, on Christmas." "My husband left me alone on Christmas Eve," Simone said. "I had somewhere I needed to be." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee mug, looked at it like she was considering whether to offer Simone any, and then went to the small back room and came back with a second mug. She set it on the counter. Simone took it. "He told you about me," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. "He didn't tell me anything," Simone said. "His father's letter did." Margaret went very still. "The letter was in a wooden box," Simone continued, "with a fountain pen and a brass key. I found it last night." She reached into her pocket and set the folded letter on the counter between them. Margaret looked at it for a long time without touching it. "He said you didn't exist," Margaret said finally. Her voice was flat and controlled, the voice of someone who has worked very hard to process something over a long period of time and hasn't entirely finished. "Vincent. When he came here, when he found me, after Charles died, he stood right there where you're standing, and he said that his father had made mistakes, and that the family had decided it was better for everyone if those mistakes stayed in the past. Simone said nothing. He had a check, Margaret said. $500,000. He put it on this counter. Right here. Her hand moved slightly, touching the edge of the counter like she was feeling for something she tried to forget was there. He told me that was the family's decision. That was how he said it. The family's decision. Like I wasn't part of it. Like I'd never been part of it. She paused. I didn't take the check. I know, Simone said. How do you know? Because you're still here. Simone looked around the bookstore. And because a woman who took a $500,000 settlement and quietly disappeared doesn't leave her lights on Christmas morning. Margaret looked at her for a moment. Then something moved through her face that might, under other circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't quite arrive. The letter, Margaret said. Does it say what I think it says? It says Charles acknowledged you. It says he asked whoever found it to make sure you weren't erased again. Simone pushed the letter toward her. Read it. Margaret picked it up. She read it standing up, which Simone thought was telling the posture of someone who had learned not to make themselves comfortable with things that might be taken away. She watched Margaret's eyes move across her father's handwriting and saw the exact moment the words reached her. Because her jaw tightened the way jaws do when you're trying to keep something in your face from revealing itself. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, he knew. She said. Her voice had changed, gone quieter and rawer. He knew Vincent was going to do this, and he still didn't. She stopped. Started again. He could have introduced me before he died. He could have just another stop. Her hand pressed flat against the counter. He ran out of time, and he thought a letter would fix it. He also left a key, Simone said. She set the brass key on the counter beside the letter. Margaret stared at it. Then she turned and went through the door to the back room. When she came back, she was holding something in her closed fist. She opened her hand on the counter between them. A second brass key. Identical. Simone looked at both keys for a moment. Then she looked up at Margaret. He gave you one too, she said. Sent it to me, Margaret said. About 8 months before he died. Just the key. No explanation. I didn't know what to do with it. I put it in a drawer. She looked at the two keys side by side. I think they're for the same box. A safe deposit box, Simone said. Yes. Simone pressed her fingers to her temples. She could feel the beginning of a headache forming, the kind that came from not enough sleep and too much cold air, and too many things happening in too short a time. He split the key, she said slowly. One to you, one hidden in the letterbox where someone might find it. He needed both people to open it. He needed someone who would come looking, Margaret said. The two women looked at each other across the counter. I have to call my mentor, Simone said, Graham Holt. He used to work with me at Meridian Capital before I left. He knows financial structuring. If Vincent tried to route that settlement payment through Cross Meridian, there's going to be a paper trail, and I need someone who knows how to read it. She was already reaching for her phone. Can you give me an hour? Margaret looked at her with an expression Simone couldn't quite name. You came here on Christmas morning, Margaret said. 7 months pregnant, because of a letter you found last night. Yes. Why? Simone thought about that for a moment. It was a fair question. It deserved a fair answer, not the first one that came to mind, which was because I had nowhere else to go, which was true but incomplete. Because he erased you, she said finally, and he was trying to erase me too. I just didn't have the right name for it until I read that letter. She met Margaret's eyes. I think your father knew that someone like me existed. I think he left the letter because he knew Vincent would eventually try this with someone. Margaret said nothing for a long moment. Then she walked to the door of the back room and pushed it open. Come sit down, she said. Your feet must be killing you. Graham Holt answered on the second ring, which was notable given that it was Christmas morning and Graham was 63 years old and had been semi-retired for 2 years. Simone's had known him for 11 years, since she was 21 years old and terrified and sitting across from him in a conference room, trying to convince him that she deserved the analyst position he'd applied for, with 3 years of student loans and her whole future riding on the outcome. He had hired her. He had mentored her. And when she'd left Meridian Capital to support Vincent's expansion into the Southeast market left the career she'd spent a decade building, piece by piece. With her own hands, Graham had shaken his head and said very carefully, "Simone, you know you don't have to do this." She'd told him she knew. She'd left anyway. She didn't lead with any of that. "I need your eyes on something," she said. Crossed Meridian Hospitality. "There should be a payment authorization from approximately 3 years ago for $250,000. I need to know where it went." Graham was quiet for a moment. "Good morning to you too," he said. Graham. I know. She could hear him moving, the sound of him getting up from somewhere comfortable and going somewhere with better light. "Are you all right?" "I will be. That's not the same thing." "I know that too." Another pause. She heard a drawer open. "Send me what you have," he said. "I'll start pulling public filings." Cross Meridian is publicly traded, which means the large payment authorization will show up in the quarterly disclosures if they weren't properly categorized. "Give me a few hours." He paused again. "Simone, is this about what I think it's about?" "It's about everything," she said. She heard him exhale. "All right," he said. "I'll call you back by noon." She hung up. Margaret had made more coffee and was sitting across from her at the small table in the back room, which doubled as receiving area. For new shipments, there were boxes of books stacked along one wall, some opened and some not, with handwritten receiving notes tucked into the flaps. It was a working space, not a performing space, and Simone found herself grateful for that. "What did he do to you?" Margaret asked. Direct, no preamble. "Vincent." Simone wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "He had an affair," she said. "I found out last night." "But the affair is almost." She stopped, reorganized. "The affair I could have survived. What I can't survive is knowing he was planning the exit strategy before I found out. Before any of it happened." She looked at the table. "That's what I don't know yet. How long he was planning." "What do you mean, exit strategy?" "I mean that when powerful men decide a relationship is no longer useful, they don't just leave," Simone said. "They manage the departure. They control the narrative. They prepare the ground." She looked at Margaret. "He came to you with lawyers and a check. He didn't just show up, he prepared. That's not emotion. That's strategy." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I want to know when he started preparing for me." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "When my mother was dying," Margaret said, "she told me about Charles. She told me she'd loved him for 30 years and kept his secret for 30 years because he'd asked her to. Because he said the family wasn't ready." Her voice was careful, precise, the voice of someone assembling something from pieces they've turned over many times. She said she didn't regret it. She said she understood why he made the choices he made. A pause. "I couldn't understand how she wasn't furious." "Are you furious?" Simone asked. "Every day," Margaret said. "And then I open the store and a retired couple comes in, and the husband asks me to help him find a book his wife would like. And she stands there smiling at him, like he's still the person she first fell in love with. And I don't know. I think maybe fury isn't the only thing." Simone thought about Vincent standing at their window, straightening his coat collar. "Fury is enough for now," she said. Graham called back at 11:47. His voice when she picked up was the voice he used when he found something significant in a spreadsheet, careful and level, the tone of a man who has learned to present bad news without letting his own reaction contaminate it. "The 250 isn't in the public filings," he said. "It's not categorized as a settlement. It's broken into 3 separate disbursements over 18 months, routed through a subsidiary called Cross Meridian Ventures, which is a holding entity for real estate acquisitions in New England." A pause. "Someone worked hard to make this look like standard operating expense." Simone closed her eyes. "Can you prove it wasn't?" she asked. "The entity has 4 properties on record," Graham said. 2 in Connecticut, 1 in New Hampshire, 1 in Simone. The 4th property is in Millhaven, Vermont. The room was very quiet. "Say that again," she said. "There's a Cross Meridian property in Millhaven," he said. "A small commercial building on Main Street, acquired approximately 3 years ago for $230,000. Simone opened her eyes and looked at Margaret across the table. "Clearwater Books," she said. It wasn't a question. Margaret's face had gone completely still. I don't know the specific tenant, Graham said carefully. I do, Simone said. She lowered her phone. She looked at Margaret. Vincent didn't try to pay you to disappear, she said. Her voice was very even. He bought your building. Margaret stared at her. He owns the property your bookstore is in, Simone said. He never gave you a cash settlement. He bought leverage. He bought the ability to remove you at any time he wanted. She set her phone on the table. He was waiting. He was keeping you exactly where he could find you and remove you whenever it became necessary. The silence in the back room lasted a long time. Then Margaret pushed back her chair and stood up. She walked to the small window that looked out on the alley behind the store and stood there with her back to Simone, her shoulders rigid, her hand pressed against the cold glass. My lease, she said. Her voice had gone tight and low. I signed a 5-year lease. The landlord was a property management company. She stopped. I never met anyone in person. It was all done by email. That's by design, Simone said. He could evict me. Yes, if I made noise, if I talked. If I tried to, he could just take the building. She turned around. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears. He thought of everything. He's very good at thinking of things, Simone said. He's also very good at not expecting the people he underestimates to think of anything. Margaret came back to the table. She sat down. She looked at Simone with an expression Simone was going to think about for a long time afterward. Not gratitude, not quite. Something more complicated than that. The expression of someone who has been alone with a particular truth for a long time and has just been someone else who can see it clearly. What do we do? Margaret asked. First, Simone said, we find what those 2 keys open. She picked up both brass keys from the table and held them next to each other. They were identical, same length, same bow at the top, same manufacturer's mark barely visible on the shaft. Safe deposit box keys. The kind used by banks that had been operating long enough to still use physical keys rather than digital access. Did your mother have a safe deposit box? She asked. She had an account at a bank in Burlington. Margaret said slowly. She closed it when she moved into assisted living. But she stopped. She kept a small box of things. Personal things. When she died, I didn't open it for almost a year. She stood up again. I put it in the storage room. She disappeared through a door at the back of the back room. Simone sat with her hands around her coffee mug, which had gone cold, and listened to the boxes being moved in the storage room, and felt Noah kick twice in slow succession, and thought about Charles Cross writing that letter in the knowledge that he was running out of time, making his careful plans with the focused desperation of a man who knows that the thing he should have done properly while he had the chance is now going to require extraordinary measures to accomplish. She thought about the kind of man who builds a business from $60,000 and a loan. She thought about the kind of son who inherits that business and forgets where it came from. Margaret came back carrying a small metal lockbox, the kind with a hinged lid and a single keyhole centered in the front. She set it on the table. Both women looked at it. Together, Simone said. Margaret picked up one of the brass keys. Simone picked up the other. Margaret fit hers into the lock first, and it turned. The lock released. She lifted the lid. Inside a manila envelope, sealed. Photographs, bound with a rubber band. And beneath those, a folded document with the letterhead of a law firm Simone didn't recognize. She reached for the document. She unfolded it. It was a trust amendment. Charles Avery Cross's living trust, amended 14 months before his death, signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. The amendment was 3 pages long and written in the dense, formal language of estate law. The substance of it was not complicated. Charles had added Margaret Vale as a beneficiary, not a small percentage, not a token equal. She was named as his biological daughter, acknowledged by blood test and by his own written statement attached as an exhibit to the amendment. She was entitled to an equal share of the Cross family estate, including, by specific enumeration, an equal share of the founding interest in Cross Meridian Hospitality. Simone read it twice. Her hands were not entirely steady. Margaret, she said. She turned the document around and pushed it across the table. Margaret read it. She read it the same way she'd read the letter, standing up, with the careful posture of someone who has learned not to get comfortable with things. But this time, when she reached the end, she didn't look at the ceiling. She looked at Simone. "He signed it," she said. "He signed it," Simone confirmed. And Vincent's attorneys received a copy. The implication settled over the table like the particular quiet after a door slams. In a large building, you feel it in your chest before you fully process it. Vincent had known. He had known about the trust amendment. He had received the document from his father's attorneys. And instead of honoring it, he had driven to Vermont with a check and a team of lawyers and bought the building underneath the woman his father had just legally recognized as his sister, and waited for her to become useful or necessary to remove. He had not buried his father's wishes out of grief or confusion. He had buried them with full knowledge of what he was destroying. Simone sat back in her chair. She pressed one hand against her belly where Noah was quiet now, resting. She thought about the nursery in the penthouse. The soft gray walls Vincent had painted himself over a long weekend in October, rolling the paint carefully in even strokes, telling her he wanted to do it himself, that he wanted their son to grow up, knowing his father had put his own hands to something. She had stood in the doorway watching him and felt something close to happiness, something that seemed like evidence of who he actually was underneath everything else. She thought about that now. She thought about the kind of man who paints a nursery and buries a trust amendment in the same calendar year. She thought about how those two things existed inside the same person. And she thought about the fact that Vincent Cross, at this precise moment, was not thinking about his unborn son, or his missing wife, or his father's ghost. He was thinking about the box. He was thinking about what she'd found, and what she knew, and what it would cost him. She was sure of that. She was sure because she knew him. Which meant she also knew what came next. She looked at Margaret. "We need Graham to look at the trust amendment tonight," she said. "And we need to find the attorney who witnessed it while he's still alive and willing to talk." She began folding the document carefully. "Vincent is going to move fast when he realizes what I took out of that box. We need to move faster." Margaret was looking at her with that expression again, the complicated one. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. Your marriage just ended last night. You're 7 months pregnant, and you drove 4 hours in the snow, and you didn't have to do any of this." Simone thought about that for a moment. "Because your father left 2 keys," she said. "He knew one person couldn't open it alone." She stood up, slowly, with the particular effort that 7 months of pregnancy required for every physical transition. "He needed both of us. I think he always knew he needed both of us." Margaret looked at the 2 brass keys on the table. She picked up both of them. She held them in her palm for a moment, feeling their weight. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. She held it up so Simone could see the name. Vincent Cross. The 2 women looked at each other. The phone rang again. Margaret set it face down on the table and let it ring until it stopped. Outside, snow had begun falling again over Millhaven, steady and indifferent, covering everything in the patient white silence of a world that keeps moving regardless of what any individual human being decides to do, or bury, or pretend didn't happen. Inside Clearwater Books, 2 women who should never have had to meet sat across from each other in the back room, with a trust amendment and 2 brass keys and 4 hours of sleep between them. And the phone screen lit up one more time as Vincent tried again. One more time. Then silence. Simone's own phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "We need to talk. This is Tessa." Simone stared at the text for 3 full seconds. "We need to talk. This is Tessa." She turned the phone face down on the table. Margaret was watching her. She had the expression of someone who had just seen a car accident happen in slow motion and was still processing whether to run toward it or away from it. "Who is it?" Margaret asked. "The woman my husband spent Christmas Eve with," Simone said. The back room of Clearwater Books was very quiet for a moment. "How did she get your number?" Margaret asked. "I don't know." Simone picked the phone back up. "Read the text again, set it down again. Vincent could have given it to her. Or she found it herself. Either way, she didn't send this because she felt guilty. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. People who feel guilty send flowers. People who want something send texts. What could she possibly want from you? I don't know yet. Are you going to respond? Simone looked at the phone for another moment. Noah shifted inside her, a slow rolling movement that pressed against her lower ribs, and she breathed through it the way her doctor had shown her. Steady in, steady out. Keep the body calm, even when nothing else is. Not yet, she said. She put the phone in her coat pocket. She picked up the trust amendment instead and read the attorney's name at the bottom of the signature block. Edwin Shaw, Esq. The firm's address was listed as Burlington, Vermont, 40 minutes from Millhaven. She showed it to Margaret. Do you know this name? She asked. Margaret looked at it. No. He witnessed your father's signature, Simone said. He was in the room when Charles signed this. If he's still practicing, or still alive, he can confirm it was executed properly. That matters enormously if Vincent tries to challenge the authenticity of the amendment. She folded the document back into the envelope. I need Graham to run him down. She called Graham. He answered on the first ring this time, which meant he'd been waiting. Edwin Shaw, she said without preamble. Estate attorney, Burlington, Vermont. I need to know if he's still active, and I need a phone number. Give me 10 minutes, Graham said. You have 7, she said, and she could hear him almost smile on the other end before she hung up. Margaret was looking at her with that expression again. You're different when you're working, Margaret said. What do you mean? You just changed. Your whole posture changed. Margaret wasn't saying it critically, just observing it the way you observe a weather shift. You got quieter and faster at the same time. Simone thought about that. I spent 6 years being careful not to be too much in my own home, she said. I spent 6 years making myself smaller, so Vincent didn't feel crowded. She picked up her coffee mug, remembered it was cold, set it back down. I forgot I knew how to take up space. Margaret said nothing for a moment. Then she got up and went to refill the coffee. Graham called back in 6 minutes. Edwin Shaw was 81 years old, semi-retired but still technically active, and living in a farmhouse 12 miles outside Burlington. Graham had a phone number and a landline as backup. Simone called the landline. It rang 8 times. She was preparing to hang up when someone answered a man's voice, old but alert, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has been awake for hours already. Shaw residence. Mr. Shaw, my name is Simone Cross. I'm the daughter-in-law of Charles Cross. I'm calling about a trust amendment you witnessed approximately 14 months before his death. A long pause. Who did you say you were? The old man asked. Simone Cross. My husband is Vincent Cross. Another pause, longer this time. How did you find this number? He asked. His voice had shifted, gone careful. Charles's letter, she said, and a lockbox that required 2 keys to open. She waited. Mr. Shaw, I have the amendment in front of me. I need to know if you're willing to confirm the execution. The pause this time was long enough that she thought he might have set the phone down. Then, is the girl safe? It took Simone a moment to understand he meant Margaret. She's sitting across from me, Simone said. Another silence. She heard him exhale a long, slow breath that carried the weight of something he'd been holding for a while. I need you to come here, he said. Not on the phone. In person. When today, he said. Before 5. I don't do business after 5. She looked at Margaret across the table. Margaret had been watching her face track the conversation. She gave a small nod. We'll be there by 2, Simone said. She hung up, and then her phone buzzed again. Not a text this time. A call. Vincent's name on the screen. She looked at it. She let it ring. It rang 6 times and stopped. Then it started again. This time she answered. She didn't say anything. She just held the phone to her ear and waited. Simone. His voice was different than it had been on Christmas Eve. The controlled edge was gone. He sounded like a man who had not slept, which was accurate, and like a man who had realized something had moved out of his reach, which was also accurate. Where are you? I'm safe, she said. That's not what I asked. It's the answer you're getting. A pause. She could hear him breathing. She could hear the apartment behind him, the specific quality of the penthouse's silence, that expensive, insulated quiet that had always felt like money rather than peace. I found my father's box, he said. You took the letter. I took several things, she said. Simone. His voice changed again, went lower. What are you doing? Something I should have done a long time ago, she said. Something your father asked someone to do before he died. Silence. Don't, he said. The word was very quiet. It was the quietest she had ever heard him be, and it was somehow more frightening than the controlled edge, because the quiet was real. Don't go looking for things that are going to hurt you. That is not what's in those documents is not what you think it is. Then what is it? He didn't answer immediately. Come home, he said instead. We can talk about all of it. I'll explain everything. Just come home and we can explain Tessa, she said. Explain the fireplace. Silence. Explain why you told Margaret Vale that the family didn't want her, she said. Explain the property management company and the building in Millhaven. Explain the trust amendment your father's attorney sent you 14 months before he died. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it that way. Explain all of it, Vincent. You have 30 seconds, and I'm standing in front of the woman you told your father's wishes didn't matter, so choose your words carefully. The silence on his end lasted longer than 30 seconds. Where are you? He asked again. Goodbye, Vincent, she said. She hung up. Her hand was shaking slightly when she lowered the phone. Just slightly. She pressed it flat against her thigh and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and waited for it to stop. Margaret was watching her. He knows, Simone said. I heard, Margaret said quietly. Not the words, just his voice. She paused. He sounds like he did when he came here. 3 years ago. That same controlled thing underneath the surface. He's calculating, Simone said. He does that when he doesn't know which way something is going to fall. He goes very quiet and he calculates. She stood up. The movement was harder than she expected, the weight of the pregnancy shifting her center of gravity in ways she was still adjusting to, and she put one hand on the table to steady herself. We need to get to Burlington before he does. They took Margaret's car, a 12-year-old Subaru with a cracked dashboard, and a heater that worked intermittently. The snow had stopped, but the roads were the particular Vermont post-Christmas condition of packed white with ice under the curves, and Margaret drove with the focused attention of someone who had spent several winters learning exactly which stretches were treacherous. Simone sat in the passenger seat with the envelope in her lap, and Tessa's unanswered text in the back of her mind, and Noah pressing steadily against her ribs. She pulled out her phone and looked at the text again. We need to talk. This is Tessa. She typed back, how did you get this number? The response came in, under a minute, Vincent's phone. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I need you to hear what I found. Simone stared at the screen. Margaret glanced over. What is it? She says she found something on his phone, Simone said. Vincent's phone? Yes. Margaret kept her eyes on the road. She has access to his phone, apparently. That's either very good or very bad. I know, Simone said. She typed. What did you find? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then a folder. He has a folder with both our names in it, yours and mine. And another woman. I need to show you. In person. Please. Simone read the message twice. She thought about what she knew about Tessa Monroe. Executive strategist. Vincent had hired her 4 years ago from a consulting firm in Chicago. She was 34. According to the Cross Meridian website bio that Simone had looked at exactly once, 6 months ago. On a Wednesday afternoon, when the particular accumulation of small wrongnesses had finally pushed her to the edge of the internet search she'd been avoiding. Tessa Monroe was accomplished and precise, and had organized Vincent's professional life with an efficiency that Simone had found, at the time, quietly reassuring. She had been reassured by the woman who was sleeping with her husband. That specific irony had a particular kind of teeth. She typed, not yet. If what you have is real, send me a photograph of the document. 1 page. If it's what you say it is, I'll tell you where to meet. She put the phone face up on her knee and watched the road. 20 seconds. A photo appeared. It was a document. A single page photographed at an angle, slightly blurred at one edge but legible. Cross Meridian Hospitality letterhead. Internal strategy memo. The date was 3 months ago, September when Simone was in her second trimester, when Vincent had been painting the nursery, when everything had still looked like it might be what she'd thought it was. The subject line read, Reputational Risks Management Personal. 3 names were listed beneath it. Margaret Vale, Simone Avery Cross, Tessa Monroe. Simone read the page. She read it again. Then she put the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window at the Vermont countryside, going past at the frozen fields and the bare-limbed trees and the gray winter sky sitting low and heavy over all of it. Stop the car, she said. Margaret looked at her sharply. Are you all right? Is it the baby? Stop the car, Simone said again. Margaret pulled over onto the shoulder. The Subaru crunched through the snow crust at the road's edge and stopped. The heater ticked. Outside, nothing moved. Simone picked up the phone and handed it to Margaret without saying anything. Margaret took it. Read the page. Her face went through several things in a short space of time: confusion. First, then comprehension, then something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, and was probably some compound of the two that didn't have a clean single name. He put me in a memo, Margaret said. Her voice was very flat. He put all 3 of us in a memo, Simone said. A reputational risk management memo. Yes, he listed his pregnant wife and his mistress and his father's daughter. As she stopped, she handed the phone back. Her hands were steady in a way that suggested it was cost something to keep them that way. What does the rest of it say? The parts that aren't in the photo? I don't know yet, Simone said, but I'm going to find out. She typed to Tessa, where are you? The response, Manhattan. I can be wherever you need me. I know what I did. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to see the rest of it. Edwin Shaw's farmhouse was the kind of place that looked like it had been built by someone who intended to stay, which Shaw apparently he'd lived there for 40 years. According to the brief biography Graham had pulled together, and the house reflected that in the way that inhabited places do, in the particular settled quality of the furniture and the bookshelves, and the accumulation of a life that hadn't been curated for anyone's benefit but his own. He met them at the door. He was 81 and showed it in his face and his hands and the deliberateness of his movement. But his eyes were clear and sharp and tracked them both immediately, moving from Simone to Margaret and staying on Margaret for a moment longer. You look like him, he said to Margaret. Not warmly, not coldly, just accurately. I know, Margaret said. He let them in. They sat in a living room that smelled of wood smoke and old books. Shaw lowered himself into an armchair across from them, with the careful economy of someone who had learned to manage the relationship between his body and gravity. He folded his hands on his knee. You found the lockbox, he said. Both keys, Simone said. And the amendment, is it intact? Yes. He nodded once. Slowly. Charles was very particular about the execution. He insisted on 2 witnesses and a notary, even though Vermont only requires 1 witness. He said he wanted it done in such a way that it couldn't be undone. He paused. He was very clear about why. He knew Vincent would try, Simone said. Shaw looked at her for a moment. He knew Vincent had already tried, he said. Simone went still. What do you mean? Margaret asked. Shaw unfolded his hands, refolded them, the gesture of someone choosing their words with care. The amendment you have in your envelope is the Second Amendment, he said. Charles drafted a first version approximately 6 months earlier. He signed it, it was witnessed and notarized, and a copy was transmitted to Cross Meridian's legal counsel as required by the trust terms. He paused. The original amendment disappeared from his attorney's files. The copy that went to Vincent's legal team was modified. The portion recognizing Margaret as a beneficiary had been removed. The room was very quiet. Removed how? Simone asked. The document was replaced, Shaw said. A different version, with the same date, same signature block, but without the relevant paragraph. His attorneys were never certain who had done it or how the substitution had occurred, but by the time Charles discovered the discrepancy, his health had deteriorated significantly. He looked at his hands. He came to me. He told me he needed to execute the amendment again, from scratch, with someone outside his regular legal team. Someone Vincent didn't have access to. He looked up. I had known Charles for 30 years. We were in the same civic organization when we were both young men. He trusted me. He had the document replaced, Margaret said. Her voice was very quiet. Vincent had his father's legal document replaced. It appears so, Shaw said carefully. I cannot say it as a legal certainty. I can say that Charles believed it completely, and Charles was not a man given to paranoia. Simone felt something shifting inside her chest that wasn't the baby. It was something larger and colder, the specific sensation of a structure you've been standing on, revealing that it extends much further underground than you knew, that the excavation required is going to be much more significant than you had prepared for. She had come here thinking Vincent had buried a trust amendment. He had done something worse. He had replaced it with a forgery. The Second Amendment, Simone said, keeping her voice even. The one in this envelope. It's legitimate. Completely, Shaw said. I can testify to every element of the execution. I watched Charles read it, line by line. I watched him sign it. I have my own copy, which I have kept in a place that is not accessible to anyone connected to Cross Meridian. He looked at her steadily. I have been waiting for someone to come looking. I told Charles I would be. How long ago was that? Margaret asked. 2 years, Shaw said. 2 years. Shaw had been sitting in this farmhouse for 2 years, waiting. Simone thought about 2 years. She thought about everything that had happened in 2 years, the fertility treatments that had finally worked, the pregnancy, the nursery, the Christmas dinners, the late meetings, the perfume, the shared tablet, the message from Tessa about the fireplace. 2 years of her life arranged on top of a buried document that a quiet old man in Vermont had been keeping safe in a place no one from Cross Meridian could find. I need to ask you something, she said to Shaw, and I need you to answer me honestly. I'll do my best, he said. Is there more? She said. Is there anything else Charles left with you? Anything beyond the amendment? Shaw looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, slowly, and went to the bookshelf on the far wall. He reached behind a row of legal volumes and withdrew a manila envelope, the kind with a metal clasp at the flap. He carried it back and held it out. Simone took it. She opened the clasp. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Charles Cross's handwriting. The note said, "For whoever comes, everything Graham will need." The passwords are the same ones Vincent used for his first email address, the one he had at 14. Ask his Aunt Patricia. Simone read the note twice. She thought about Graham calling her on Christmas morning. She thought about Aunt Patricia in Georgia, who had given her the roast chicken recipe. She thought about Charles Cross, who had apparently spent the last years of his life constructing something very full and very deliberate, with the particular focused patience of a man who understood that the person he was building it against had every structural advantage, and that the only way to defeat that was to be smarter and more patient, and to know exactly who to trust with which piece. He had trusted Simone with the letter. He had trusted Margaret with one key. He had trusted Shaw with the amendment and the drive. He had trusted Aunt Patricia with the password, without knowing it. He had built a case, not a grief-stricken letter, not a vague moral statement. A case, the kind that held up. Simone held the USB drive in her palm. He knew, she said, not to anyone specifically, just aloud, because it needed to be said. He knew exactly what Vincent was, Shaw said quietly. He loved him anyway. That's the part that broke his heart. Not the money, not the business, that he knew his son and loved him and couldn't find a way to reach him. He sat back down. He said, and I remember this clearly, he said that the worst thing a father can discover is that he raised someone capable of this. The room held that for a moment. Margaret was looking at the floor. Simone could see the line of her jaw, tight and controlled, and recognized it. She'd been doing the same thing with her own jaw for the past 24 hours. Simone's phone buzzed. "Graham," she answered. "I need you to look at something," Graham said. He sounded different than before, not alarmed, but sharpened. The specific alert quality of someone who has found something significant and is being careful about how he describes it. I've been going through the public filings for Cross Meridian for the past 6 months, and there's a pattern in the legal and compliance expenditures that is. He paused. Simone, there's a line item that started appearing in the quarterly disclosures approximately 3 months ago. Legal and strategic advisory fees. They're categorized under executive separation planning. Simone sat very still. Say that again, she said. Executive separation planning, Graham said. 3 months ago. The fees are being paid to an outside firm, not Cross Meridian's in-house legal team. The amounts are consistent with what you'd expect for Simone. This is domestic asset structuring. This is someone preparing for a divorce proceeding and figuring out how to position the marital assets before the other party has legal representation. 3 months ago, September, the same month as the reputational risk management memo with her name in it. The same month Vincent had painted the nursery. Simone stood up from her chair. She stood up too fast, and the room tilted slightly, and she put her hand on the arm of the chair and breathed in, breathed out, waited for her body to settle. And the whole time her mind was running the numbers with the cold mechanical clarity that she had spent 10 years in developing, and 6 years trying to quiet and could not now turn off, no matter how much the rest of her wanted to. 3 months ago, Vincent had begun preparing for their divorce. She was 4 months pregnant in September. He had been preparing to divorce his pregnant wife while painting their son's nursery. He had been preparing the asset structure, hiding what he could, positioning what he couldn't hide, calculating how to minimize what she could claim while she was in the next room, picking out the exact right shade of gray for the walls. She had been in the next room. She had thought the sound of the roller was love. Simone, Graham said carefully. Are you there? I'm here, she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. There's more, he said. Tell me. The advisory documents, I can only see what's in the public filings, not the actual strategy memos, but the billing codes indicate they were working on something beyond asset structuring. He paused. There's a code that I recognize from a case I consulted on 8 years ago. It's used by family law firms when they're preparing to establish a narrative of Simone. The billing code is for psychological and behavioral documentation. It's used when a party intends to challenge the other party's fitness or stability in a custody proceeding. The word custody landed in the room like something physical. Simone's hand tightened on the phone. He was building a case, she said. Against me. The billing pattern suggests someone was collecting documentation related to your health, your behavior, and your mental state during the pregnancy, Graham said. The hospital visits, the premature contractions, the Christmas departure. He didn't know about those yet, she said. No, Graham said. But when they happen, they get added to the file. A pause. Simone. The filing date that's built into the billing cycle, someone was planning to file first. Before you had any idea this was coming. File first. She had heard those words before. She had heard them on Christmas morning, standing in the penthouse bedroom, listening to the apartment sounds after the door closed behind her. She had thought she'd imagined them. She'd been sleep-deprived and grieving and 7 months pregnant, and she had decided she'd imagined hearing Vincent on the phone through the wall. She hadn't imagined it. File first. He had said it Christmas morning, standing in his own penthouse with his wife's ring under this Christmas tree, the day he came home to find her gone. She hadn't been imagining things. She had been exactly as clear-eyed as she always was, and she had spent 6 years being told that her clarity was stress, and her instincts were emotion, and her observations were pregnancy, making her irrational. And now she was standing in a retired estate attorney's living room in Vermont, holding a USB drive that a dead man had built into a case. And she understood with a finality that rearranged something permanent inside her, that she had never once been wrong about any of it. She had just been willing to live inside the doubt. That part was finished. Graham, she said, I need you to get me a family law attorney. The best one you know. Not someone who knows Vincent. Someone who has beaten people like Vincent in court. I already have a name, he said quietly. Naomi Pierce. She's in Manhattan. I called her this morning. You called her this morning? I've known you for 11 years, he said, and I know what those billing codes mean. Simone closed her eyes for 1 second. She opened them. Set the meeting, she said. She hung up. She looked at Margaret across the room. She looked at Shaw in his armchair, watching her with those clear, sharp eyes. She looked at the USB drive in her hand, and then her body, threatening, did something it had been threatening to do for the past 20 minutes, the thing she'd been breathing through and ignoring and telling herself was stress rather than what it actually was. A contraction hit, not a small one. She grabbed the arm of the chair. Margaret was on her feet instantly. "Simone, I'm fine," Simone said. The words came out tight because the contraction was real, a genuine muscular event that moved through her lower abdomen like a closing fist, and it lasted approximately 45 seconds, which was 35 seconds longer than she'd have preferred. When it eased, she straightened up. She was sweating slightly at her hairline. She looked at Margaret. "It's too early," she said. Her voice was steady. "He's 32 weeks. It's too early." "We need to go to the hospital," Margaret said. "I know," Simone said. She picked up her coat from the chair. She put the USB drive in her coat pocket with the brass keys and Charles's note. She looked at Shaw. "Thank you," she said. "Be careful," he said. He was already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to call my contact at the Vermont bar. Whatever happens next, you're going to need the amendment authenticated through official channels quickly." He met her eyes. "Don't let him get ahead of you."
He already thinks he's ahead of me,
Simone said. She picked up her bag. "That's the last mistake he's going to make," she said. The contraction came back 14 minutes later. Simone was in the passenger seat of Margaret's Subaru, the heater finally working for once, pushing warm air against the windshield, while Margaret drove with both hands at 10 and 2, and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. The contraction moved through Simone's lower body like a slow electrical current, different from the Braxton Hicks she'd been having for weeks. Those were tightening, manageable, the body rehearsing. This was something else. This had direction to it. This had intention. She breathed through it with her eyes open and her hand flat on her belly and counted the seconds the way her Obgyn had taught her. 48 seconds. She watched the Vermont countryside slide past the window and thought about Noah and thought about the USB drive in her pocket and thought about Edwin Shaw's voice saying, "The worst thing a father can discover is that he raised someone capable of this." And when the contraction ended, she let out a breath that shook slightly at the edges. "How bad?" Margaret asked without taking her eyes off the road. "Bad enough," Simone said. "How far apart?" 14 minutes from the first one. Margaret pressed the accelerator slightly. The nearest hospital was 22 miles north. Margaret had pulled it up on her phone, while Simone was still standing in Shaw's living room, putting on her coat, and she had the route running on the dashboard now, a blue line, cutting north through the gray afternoon. The ETA said 31 minutes. Simone's phone buzzed. "Vincent," she declined it. It buzzed again, 30 seconds later. She declined it again, and then opened her contacts and called Graham. "I'm on my way to a hospital in Vermont," she said when he picked up. "Premature contractions. I need you to do 3 things while I'm being admitted." "Tell me," said, no preamble, no alarm in his voice, just attention. "Call Naomi Pierce and tell her we need to move fast. Tell her Vincent has been building a custody case for 3 months, and he's going to file the moment he finds out I'm hospitalized. She needs to understand that the hospital visit is going to become part of his narrative, if we're not already in motion before he files." Done. What else? The USB drive Shaw gave me an encrypted archive. The password is Vincent's first email address from when he was 14. I need you to call his Aunt Patricia in Georgia. Her number is in my contacts under Patricia Cross. Tell her I asked you to call, and tell her I need the password. She paused through a smaller wave of pressure that wasn't quite a contraction, but wasn't nothing either. She'll know what you mean. And Graham, tell her I said the chicken recipe was perfect. A brief pause. The chicken recipe was perfect, he repeated. Got it. Third thing? Call Tessa Monroe, Simone said. Her number came through my phone this morning. Call her and find out what else is in that folder. Not by text, call her. I need to know the full scope of what Vincent had prepared before I'm lying in a hospital bed, where he can control who has access to me. I'll handle all 3, Graham said. Simone, how are you? 32 weeks, she said. He needs to stay in for at least 4 more. Okay, Graham said. His voice was steady, and she was grateful for it, for the specific steadiness of someone who cared about her and was also good at his job, which was not a combination she'd had access to much in the past 6 years. I'll call you as soon as I have anything. She hung up. Another contraction came at the 22-minute mark, this one harder, lasting 53 seconds. She gripped the door handle and breathed and didn't make a sound, which cost her more than the contraction itself. Margaret pulled into the hospital entrance at a speed that was technically legal and practically aggressive, and stopped the car at the emergency entrance doors with a precision that suggested she'd made a decision about what mattered right now. "Go," she said. "Park the car," Simone said. "Simone, park the car and then come in," Simone said. "I need you inside with me." "Not out here." Something moved through Margaret's face. She nodded. Simone got out of the car. The emergency entrance nurses responded the way they were trained to respond when a visibly pregnant woman walked through the doors, holding her abdomen quickly, efficiently, with a wheelchair that appeared almost immediately, and questions that Simone answered in a precise and orderly fashion: gestational age, frequency of contractions, duration, when the first one hit, any bleeding, any other symptoms. She answered everything correctly, because she had read every piece of prenatal literature her obgyn had given her, with the same focused attention she'd once applied to financial disclosure documents, and the nurses responded to her clarity by treating her like a person rather than a panic. She was in a bed in labor and delivery within 12 minutes of walking through the doors. They put monitors on her, one for contractions, one tracking Noah's heartbeat, and the sound of his heartbeat filled the small room immediately, fast and steady, and completely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 36 hours. Just his heart doing its work, unaware that the world outside had any problems at all. Simone lay back against the elevated bed and listened to it. She closed her eyes for exactly 10 seconds. Then she opened them and looked at the nurse, adjusting the monitor leads. "Who has authority to allow visitors to this room?" The nurse looked up. "You do. I want my name kept off the general admission board," Simone said. "And I need a note in my chart that I am the sole person authorizing visitors. If someone calls asking if I'm here or tries to come to this floor without my prior authorization, they are to be told that patient privacy laws prevent confirmation of any admission." The nurse looked at her for a moment. "Are you in a safety situation?" "I'm in a legal situation," Simone said. "My name is Simone Cross. My husband's name is Vincent Cross. He did not come with me, and he is not currently authorized to have information about my whereabouts or medical status." The nurse nodded once, made a note in the tablet she was carrying, and left the room. Margaret arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, from what Simone suspected was not walking, but running from the parking structure. She came through the door and looked at the monitors, and at Simone in the bed, and at the room, with the rapid, assessing look of someone recalibrating their understanding of how serious this was. "He's okay?" she asked. She meant Noah. "His heartbeat is fine," Simone said. "They're trying to stop the contractions. They gave me medication." "We wait." Margaret sat down in the chair beside the bed. She sat in it, the way people sit in hospital chairs when they're settling in, rather than visiting, with the weight of someone who has decided they're not going anywhere. Neither woman said anything for a moment. The monitors beeped. Noah's heartbeat filled the room. "They're going to call him," Simone said. "Standard protocol. If I'm admitted, the hospital will attempt to notify my emergency contact, and my emergency contact on file at my regular obgyn is Vincent." She looked at the ceiling. "They've been trying to call him since I got in the car. He's going to know I'm here. Does that change anything?" Margaret asked. "It changes the timeline," Simone said. "He's going to try to get into this room. He's in Manhattan. He has a plane," Simone said flatly. Margaret looked at her. "He has a company plane," Simone said. 2 hours, maybe less, if he files right now." She looked at her phone. No missed calls from Graham yet. No text from Tessa. The screen was quiet in the way that screens are quiet when too many things are happening simultaneously, in places you can't see. She picked up the phone and texted Naomi Pierce directly. Graham had forwarded her the number that morning. She had not yet used it. She typed, "This is Simone Cross. I'm admitted to Northern Vermont Medical Center. Premature contractions at 32 weeks. My husband does not yet know I'm here, but will within the hour. I need to know if emergency protective filing is possible before he reaches me. Graham Holt has the full context. She sent it. The response came back in 4 minutes, which told her something about Naomi Pierce, before she'd heard her voice, already briefed by Graham. Yes, emergency filing is possible. I need 90 minutes and your signature on 3 documents. Can you sign from where you are? Simone typed yes. Naomi sending now. Sign and return. I'll handle the filing. 3 documents arrived by secure email link. Simone read each one with the monitors beeping, and Noah's heartbeat steady in the background, and Margaret sitting in the chair, reading something on her own phone. And Simone read every word of every document, the way she'd been trained to read financial contracts, looking for what wasn't there as much as what was, checking every defined term, every exception clause, every piece of language that could be reinterpreted later by someone with better lawyers. They were clean. She signed all 3. She sent them back. Her phone rang 40 minutes later, a Manhattan number she didn't recognize. She answered. Mrs. Cross. A man's voice formal, the specific tone of someone performing professional neutrality over something that was not neutral at all. My name is Richard Carver. I'm calling on behalf of Vincent Cross. I'm his... I know who you are, Simone said. She didn't, but she knew what he was. Tell him I received the documents. A pause. I'm not certain what documents you're referring to. Tell him I received the documents, she repeated. And tell him that his emergency contact status does not give him legal access to my medical information or my location. If he arrives at this hospital, he is to wait in the public waiting area on the ground floor. He is not to come to labor and delivery. Another pause. Mrs. Cross, I think it would be beneficial if we could arrange a time to... Mr. Carver, she said, I'm 32 weeks pregnant, and I'm in a hospital bed, and I have a monitoring lead on my belly, and I am not available for beneficial arrangements right now. Goodbye. She hung up. Margaret looked at her. His attorney, Simone said. He already has his attorney calling you, Margaret said. He's had his attorney preparing for 3 months, Simone said. Calling me is nothing. She set the phone down. He's scared. Good, Margaret said. The word came out with a flatness that was more satisfying than anger would have been. Graham called at 4:17. Tessa Monroe, he said without opening pleasantries. I spoke to her for 40 minutes. Simone. The folder on Vincent's phone has 12 documents in it. She photographed all of them, and she's emailing them to Naomi Pierce right now with a written statement of how she sixed them, of how she accessed them, and why she's providing them voluntarily. What's in the documents? The reputational risk memo you already saw. An asset protection strategy prepared by Carver's firm, that's the divorce filing prep Graham mentioned. A psychological assessment recommendation. Graham's voice went slightly careful here. Someone advised Vincent to seek documentation of what they called pregnancy-related emotional instability. The memo specifically recommends monitoring your behavior around medical appointments, social interactions, and professional activities during the 3rd trimester. The room was very quiet except for the monitors. They were watching me, Simone said. The memo recommends it, Graham said. I can't confirm it was implemented. It was implemented, she said. She was very certain of this without being able to specify the evidence. The way you're certain of some things because they explain too many small details you'd previously left unexamined. The feeling of being observed that she'd dismissed as paranoia. Vincent noting the specific time she took her prenatal vitamins. His unusual interest in which doctors she was seeing and when. She had thought it was involvement. It had been documentation. There's more, Graham said. Tell me. One document is a custody strategy brief. It lays out the intended approach for a custody proceedings if you contested the divorce. A pause. Simone, it specifically recommends emphasizing your departure from full-time professional work, your reliance on Vincent's income, and what it describes as your pattern of emotional decision-making during the pregnancy. He stopped. It recommends the Christmas departure as a key exhibit. Your hospital admission tonight is also listed as a category of documentation to collect, under the heading of maternal instability indicators. Simone held the phone against her ear and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was that specific institutional off-white that hospital ceilings always were, and there was a small water stain in one corner that was shaped roughly like a handprint, and she focused on that while she processed what Graham had just told her. He had planned to use her hospital admission. He had planned to use the fact that she was in a hospital bed tonight as evidence that she was unstable. He had planned, in a document prepared 3 months ago, to take her son. "Simone," Graham said quietly. "I'm here," she said. "Naomi has everything," he said. "She's filing tonight. The trust amendment is already with the Vermont bar through Shaw's contact. The corporate payments are going to a forensic accountant first thing tomorrow morning. The governance issue with Margaret's recognition is going to an independent board member at Cross Meridian, who Shaw knows personally." He paused. "You are not behind. I want you to hear that. You are not behind." She realized her hand was shaking again. She pressed it against her thigh. "The password," she said, "for the USB drive. Patricia gave it to me," he said. "First try." She also said a brief pause, and she could hear him consulting something he'd written down. "She said to tell you that she always knew, and she's sorry she didn't say so sooner." Simone closed her eyes. "Open the drive, Graham." "I already did," he said. Simone's. Charles kept everything. Emails between Vincent and his attorneys about the trust amendment substitution. A digital copy of the original First Amendment and a copy of the replacement version, with the comparisons highlighting the removed language. Corporate transaction records for the Millhaven property purchase. And he stopped for a moment. "What?" she said. "There's an email chain between Vincent and Richard Carver," Graham said. "From 2 years ago. It's about a contingency strategy. Specifically, it addresses what to do if the trust amendment ever surfaced." He was quiet for a moment. "Simone, the email chain discusses using a custody dispute as leverage. If the trust issue came to light, the strategy was to immediately file for divorce and initiate custody proceedings to give Vincent negotiating power." Another pause. "This email says," and I'm reading directly, it says that a disputed custody case involving a black wife with no current professional income and a documented history of fertility-related medical intervention would be unlikely to present well in a conservative jurisdiction. The monitors beeped. Noah's heartbeat was steady and fast and completely unaware. Simone said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "He was going to use our son as a bargaining chip to bury his father's wishes." "That's what the email implies," Graham said. She pressed her free hand flat against her belly, where Noah was. She had nothing to say about that. There were no words for it that were sufficient, no emotional response that fit the exact shape of what she'd just been told. Because the thing she'd just been told was that the man who had painted the nursery gray and pressed his forehead against her belly and called their son by name had simultaneously been preparing to weaponize that son's existence against her. Those two things existed in the same man. They always had. She just hadn't had the documentation. She had it now. "Send everything to Naomi," she said. "Tonight." "Already sending," Graham said. She hung up. The contraction that came at 4:43 was the worst one yet. It built from the bottom up, a deep grinding pressure that moved through her lower back and wrapped around her abdomen and lasted 68 seconds. She counted every one of them with her eyes open and her jaw clenched and her hand pressing the call button for the nurse. The nurse came in and checked the monitor and adjusted the medication drip and said something reassuring in a tone Simone registered but could not process because 68 seconds was too long and 32 weeks was too early, and she was holding everything together with the sheer force of not letting go right now because she could not afford to let go right now. When it ended, she was damp at her hairline and her hands were shaking, and Margaret was beside the bed with her hand held out, and Simone took it without thinking, just grabbed it. The way you grab something solid when the ground has been moving. "He's okay," Margaret said. She was looking at the fetal monitor. "The heartbeat is still good." "I know," Simone said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "You can fall apart a little," Margaret said quietly. "I'll hold the rest." "Not yet," Simone said. "Simone." "Not yet." She let go of Margaret's hand, sat up slightly. "He's coming. Vincent is coming, and I need to be ready, and I cannot." She stopped, breathed. "I cannot fall apart in this bed before he gets here. I'll fall apart later. I'll fall apart after." Margaret looked at her for a moment. Then she sat back down in the chair. "Okay," she said. Then tell me what you need me to do, Simone thought. When he arrived, she said, he's going to try to come up here. They'll stop him at the desk, but he's going to push. He pushes quietly. That's how he does it. He doesn't raise his voice. He just keeps applying pressure until whoever is in his way decides it's easier to move. She looked at Margaret. I need you to go down to the main desk now, before he gets here, and talk to the charge nurse. Tell her who you are. You're my support person. You're the person I've authorized to be here. And you need her to understand that if a man comes in and says he's my husband, hospital protocol doesn't override my explicit written request for visitor restriction. He's the father, Margaret said, not defending him, just naming the complication. He's the father, Simone agreed. That gives him rights related to the baby once Noah is born. It does not give him rights to my medical information or my room before that. She met Margaret's eyes. Go talk to the charge nurse. Be calm, be specific. Use my name and his name. Margaret stood up. She went to the door and stopped. You're not going to call him, are you? She said. Even though the hospital has been trying to reach him for hours. No, Simone said, but you're going to let him come. I'm going to let him come, she said, because whatever he's done to me, Noah deserves to have a record showing that his father was given every opportunity. She looked at the monitor. I'm not keeping that from him, but I'm not handing him a single thing he doesn't deserve. Margaret held her gaze for a moment. Then she left. Simone lay back against the pillow. She listened to Noah's heartbeat on the monitor, fast and steady and perfectly itself, and she pressed both hands flat against her belly, and she thought about all the specific things that had been done and planned and documented and executed in the time since she was 4 months pregnant with the person whose heartbeat was filling this room, all the careful strategy that had been built around the existence of a baby who had no idea any of it was happening. She thought about the nursery. She thought about the gray walls. She thought about standing in the doorway, watching Vincent roll the paint. And she thought about how she'd felt something close to happiness in that moment. And she thought that the happiness had been real. It was. Her happiness. She'd felt it genuinely. It had existed, even if everything around it had been performance. Her happiness had been real. She was going to hold on to that. The door opened at 6:12. Not a nurse. Not Margaret. Vincent. He was wearing the coat he'd worn on Christmas Eve, and he hadn't shaved, and he looked like a man who had been on a plane for 2 hours after not sleeping for 36, which was exactly what he was. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, genuinely undone, not performatively distressed, not strategically emotional, but actually, physically, specifically wrecked in the way that a person looks when something has happened that they could not control. He stood in the doorway. He looked at Simone in the bed. He looked at the monitors. He heard Noah's heartbeat. Something moved through his face that she had no name for and didn't try to find one. How did you get up here? She said. Her voice was flat. I told them I was the father, he said. You're not authorized to be in this room. Simone Vincent. She kept her voice even. Even was the only thing she had right now. You are not authorized to be in this room. If you stay, I will ask the nurse to remove you. I am not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's what's happening. He didn't move from the doorway. He stood there and looked at her, and the monitors and the IV line in her arm, and the evidence of everything that his choices had produced. And for a moment, his jaw tightened in the way she knew, the controlled thing that happened when he was calculating. And she waited for the calculation to resolve into whatever version of charm or pressure or negotiation he decided to deploy. But then something else happened. His jaw loosened. His shoulders, which had been held with the particular rigid tension of a man who had been managing his posture for 2 days, dropped slightly. He looked at the fetal monitor. Is he okay? Vincent asked. His voice was stripped of everything. Just the question. Simone looked at her husband, the man she'd married, the man who'd painted the nursery, the man who had eaten her Christmas dinner cold on Christmas Eve, and left anyway. The man whose name was on a document that called her unstable and described her pregnancy as a liability. She looked at him and said, his heartbeat is strong. Vincent's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. Simone, he said. Don't, she said. Please. Vincent. Her voice cracked slightly on his name, just slightly, the first crack in the even surface, and she felt it happen and didn't stop it. I know about the folder. I know about the memo. I know about Richard Carver and the filing date and what the strategy says about me and our son. She held his gaze. I know about the trust amendment and what you did to the first one. I know about Margaret's building. I know about the USB drive. Your father left for whoever came looking. She watched his face go through a series of things she didn't try to read. I know all of it, and I need you to understand that I know all of it before you say another word to me. The silence in the room was enormous. Noah's heartbeat kept going. Steady, unwavering, 32 weeks old, and already the most honest thing in the room. Vincent stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he took one step in. Just one. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Not until I know he's okay. Simone looked at him. She thought about what Margaret had said. You can fall apart a little. I'll hold the rest. She thought about Naomi Pierce filing documents in Manhattan. She thought about Graham with the USB drive. She thought about Charles Cross building his careful case piece by piece with the knowledge that the person he loved was capable of this. She thought about Noah's heartbeat. Sit down, she said finally. In the chair by the door. Not next to me. By the door. Vincent moved to the chair by the door. He sat down. He laced his hands together and looked at the floor, and then looked up at the fetal monitor, and then looked at Simone, and she looked back at him. And neither of them said anything for a long time. And Noah's harsh heartbeat filled the silence between them like a third presence in the room, the only one in the room who hadn't yet made a single choice that needed to be accounted for. The door opened. Margaret walked in. She saw Vincent immediately. Vincent saw her. The recognition on his face was immediate and physical. She saw it move through him like something seismic, a visible disruption of the careful surface. Because Margaret Vale had his father's jawline and Charles's eyes, and she was standing in a Vermont hospital room next to his pregnant wife. And she was real. She was present. She was not erased. She had never been as erased as he'd needed her to be. Margaret looked at him. She did not speak. She walked to the chair beside Simone's bed, the one closer to the monitors, the one that mattered, and she sat down in it. And she looked at Vincent across the room. And she said, with the particular quiet of someone who has been waiting a long time to be in the same room, with a truth. When you told me this family didn't want me, she said, did you ever actually ask them? The question sat in the room. Vincent Cross, CEO, strategist, the man who had spent 3 years managing every variable in the specific geometry of his own life, had no answer prepared for that. For the first time in longer than Simone could calculate, he had walked into a room where no one was going to let him control how the story ended. And somewhere down the corridor, past the nurse's station and the other rooms and the elevator bank, a phone was ringing at the desk, Richard Carver calling back probably, or the board contact Shaw had reached, or Naomi Pierce confirming the filing had gone through. And all of it was in motion now. All of it was already happening. And the only thing left was for Vincent Cross to decide. In this specific room with these specific people, and his son's heartbeat in the air between them, who he actually was when there was nothing left to manage. The monitor beeped. Noah held on. Vincent didn't answer Margaret's question that night. He sat in the chair by the door, with his hands laced together, and his eyes moving between the fetal monitor and the floor. And Margaret let the question sit where she'd placed it in the center of the room, unmoved, patient as a stone, and didn't push. She'd waited 3 years. She could wait another hour. The nurse came in at 7:40 and checked Simone's monitors and adjusted the medication and said the contractions were spacing out, which was what they wanted to see, and that doctor, Parrish, would be in to check on her before the end of the shift. She glanced at Vincent in the corner chair with the professional neutrality of someone who had seen many versions of this particular hospital room configuration and had learned not to editorialize. When the nurse left, the room was quiet again except for Noah. His heartbeat was steady, at 148 beats per minute, which Simone knew was normal, which she had memorized from her prenatal, reading the way she memorized everything that mattered to her. She lay with one hand on her belly and felt him settle deeper, less active now, as if he understood on some cellular level that the crisis was easing, that he could rest. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about what Naomi Pierce was doing right now in Manhattan. She thought about the documents being filed, the trust amendment being authenticated through official channels, the forensic accountant who would start on the cross-meridian records in the morning. She thought about all of it moving forward, without her, in the specific way that things move forward when you've done the preparation correctly, not because you're present, but because the groundwork holds. She had laid the groundwork. She was allowed to lie still for a moment. "Vincent," she said. He looked up. "If you have something to say," she said, "say it." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at Margaret. "I told you the family didn't want you," he said to Margaret. His voice was low and stripped down. "I never asked them." Margaret received this without expression. "I know," she said. He stopped. "Started differently. When my father died, I found everything. The letters, the photographs, the First Amendment. I sat with it for a week. He was looking at his hands again. I kept thinking about what it meant, what it changed." He paused. "I told myself I was protecting the family from confusion, from the disruption of a claim from someone nobody knew." "That's not why," Margaret said. He looked at her. "You know that's not why," she said. "Don't tell me the version you've been telling yourself for 3 years. Tell me the real one." A long silence. "I was afraid," he said finally. "I was afraid that if I brought you in, I became less. That there'd be less of everything, the inheritance, the company, the position. Less of who my father was, to me specifically." He said it plainly, without inflection, the way you say something, when you've finally stopped dressing it up. "I knew what I was doing. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway." Margaret looked at him for a long time. "Your father built that company with $60,000, and a loan," she said. "He built it so you'd have something. You turned it into a reason to erase people." She paused. "You erased me?" "You were going to erase Simone. You were going to use your son to do it." "I know," he said. "You don't get absolution from me for knowing," she said. "Knowing and doing it anyway is worse than not knowing. I'm not asking for absolution. Then what are you asking for?" He looked at Simone. Simone looked back at him. "I'm not asking for anything," he said finally. "I don't have the right to ask for anything right now." The room held that. The monitor kept its rhythm. Dr. Parrish came in at 8:15, a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the unhurried manner of someone who had been delivering difficult news and good news in equal measure, for long enough to know exactly how to carry both. She checked the readings, asked Simone several questions, pressed gently on her abdomen, and listened with a stethoscope placed directly on the skin of her belly. "Contractions have decreased in frequency and intensity," she said. "The medication is working. I want to keep you overnight for observation and continue the tocolytic drip. But if things remain stable through the morning, I'm cautiously optimistic we can stop active labor." She looked at Simone over her glasses. 32 weeks is early. I want him in there for at minimum 4 more weeks. That means bed rest at home. Reduce stress." She paused on this word in a way that made it clear she was aware that reduced stress was doing a lot of heavy lifting in the context of this particular room and monitoring twice a week with your regular obgyn. "I understand," Simone said. Dr. Parrish looked at Vincent. "Are you the father?" "Yes," he said. She looked at Simone. "He can stay in that chair," Simone said. Dr. Parrish left without further comment. The night passed in the particular elongated way that hospital nights pass nurses at intervals, the hallway noise filtering under the door, the overhead light dimmed but not dark, the monitors keeping their steady accounting of the 2 heartbeats in the room. Margaret dozed in the chair at some point, her head tipped back at an angle that was going to produce a stiff neck in the morning. Vincent did not sleep. Simone slept in pieces, 40 minutes here and 30 there, surfacing each time to check the monitor and feel Noah's position and drift back under. At 2 in the morning she woke, and Vincent was still in the chair by the door, awake, watching the fetal monitor with the hollow eyes of a man who had been sitting with something large and uncomfortable for a long time and had stopped pretending it was manageable. She watched him for a moment without speaking. "You're still here," she said. "Yes," he said. "The chair is terrible," she said. Yes, he said. She looked at the ceiling. Did you actually love me? At any point. I need to know if it was ever real. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Yes, he said. Not well. But yes. She thought about that. The affair started before the pregnancy, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. How long? 14 months, he said. She received this number without visible reaction, though it moved through her in a way that was going to take time to fully process 14 months, which meant it had been happening while they were doing the last round of IVF, which meant it had been happening while she was in the clinical sterility of a fertility clinic, hoping, which was an ugliness she was going to have to sit with at some later point when she had the capacity for it. And Tessa, she said. It's over, he said. She ended it. Before Christmas, he paused. I didn't tell you because you were hoping you could close all the other problems first, Simone said, before I found out about any of them. Yes, he said. At least he was done lying. There was that. The strategy memo, she said. The one with my name in it. The psychological documentation. The custody approach. She turned her head to look at him directly. Were you going to use our son against me? His jaw tightened. The memo was Carver's recommendation, he said. I didn't. Vincent. He stopped. Were you going to use our son against me? She said again. Same words. Same tone. Just the question, sitting there, not going anywhere. A long silence. I don't know, he said. That's the truth. I don't know. Carver told me it was leverage. I told him to prepare it. I didn't tell him to use it. He looked at her. I don't know where the line is between preparing something and being willing to use it. I don't know. I do, she said quietly. There isn't one. He had nothing to say to that. She turned back to the ceiling. When the mediation happens, she said, you're going to cooperate. The trust amendment, the property in Millhaven, the corporate payments, everything comes into the light. You don't fight it. Simone, don't it, she said again. Because if you fight it, everything Graham has on that USB drive goes to the board and to the press and to the Vermont DA's office. And what happens then is not something either of us can control. She kept her voice even. Your father built something real. You made it into something that needs to be cleaned. You can be the person who cleans it, or you can be the person who made it dirty in the first place. That's the only choice you have left. He was quiet. Margaret gets what the amendment says she gets, Simone said. No conditions. No negotiated percentage. What your father signed. That affects the controlling interest structure, he said. I know, she said. You have accountants. Figure it out. Another silence. And us, he said, very quietly. There is no us, she said. Not cruelly. Just accurately. There's Noah. Noah is what there is between us now, and how you show up for him is every decision you make from this point forward. She looked at him. I'm not going to keep him from you. That's not who I am, and it's not what he deserves. But you do not get to manage me. You do not get to manage my choices, or my career, or my relationships, or how I raise our son in my own home. Do you understand that? Yes, he said. Say it like you mean it, she said. He looked at her directly. I understand, he said. And this time it was different, not the managed version, not the boardroom tone. Just a man in a terrible chair in the middle of the night, saying something true. She believed him. Not completely. Not in the way she'd believed him years ago when belief had been easy and untested. But she believed this specific statement, in this specific moment, which was enough. She closed her eyes. Get some sleep, she said, in the chair. She heard him shift in the chair. She slept. Noah Avery Cross arrived 6 weeks later, not 32 weeks, but 38, which meant the medication had worked, and the bed rest had worked, and the twice-weekly monitoring had worked, and all the careful, unglamorous logistics of the final weeks of a high-risk pregnancy had worked the way careful, unglamorous. Logistics work when someone executes them properly. He weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces and was 20 inches long and had a full head of dark hair and a cry that Simone's Obgyn called robust, which was the word Simone had been waiting to hear from the moment she'd checked into that Vermont hospital 6 weeks earlier. He spent 4 days in the NICU as a precaution. Simone spent those 4 days in a chair next to his isolette, sleeping in increments, eating the food the nurses brought her without tasting it. talking to Noah in a low, continuous voice about whatever came to mind: the financial mechanics of hotel development, the books she was planning to read, the apartment she was setting up in a building 3 miles from the penthouse, the fact that he had an aunt in Vermont who owned a bookstore and would probably let him read anything he wanted off any shelf he could reach. Vincent came every day. He sat in the chair on the other side of the isolette and watched his son and did not make conversation and did not push and did not try to change anything. He just showed up. On the 4th day, when the neonatologist said Noah was ready to be moved to a regular room, Vincent looked at Simone across the isolette and said, "Thank you for letting me be here." She nodded. That was all. The mediation took 4 months. It was not smooth or clean or the kind of thing that could be described without the specific weight of what it cost. There were sessions that ran past midnight. There were moments when Carver tried to reframe the custody approach, and Naomi Pierce dismantled the framing with a precision that Simone found, in the abstract, genuinely impressive, and, in the personal, deeply exhausting. There were moments when Vincent's cooperation slipped, when the instinct to manage and control resurfaced and had to be named and pushed back, again, each time it came up, with the same patient insistence that it had to be named the first time. But it held. The trust amendment was authenticated. The independent forensic accountant confirmed the corporate payment routing and the Millhaven property purchase structure. An independent governance review of Cross Meridian was initiated by a board member the one Shaw knew, a woman named Judith Crane, who had been on the board for 12 years and had been quietly uncomfortable for at least 3, and the review produced a restructuring of executive oversight that removed unilateral decision-making authority from the CEO on legal and financial matters above a certain threshold. Vincent kept his position. He kept his name on the building his father had built. He lost the ability to operate as if the company were a personal instrument. Margaret received the inheritance Charles had intended for her, the financial portions, the equal stake in the founding interest, acknowledged in writing and in legal fact, with her name attached to it in documents that could not be substituted or buried or replaced. Cross Meridian's corporate records were amended to reflect her status as a beneficiary of the founding interest. The property management company that held her building's title transferred ownership Clearwater Korchakop of the Clearwater Books property to Margaret Vale outright, as part of the mediated settlement, with no further lease arrangement required. The building was hers. The bookstore was hers. The sign in the window was hers. She cried when the transfer document was signed. Not in front of anyone. Simone knew, because Margaret told her afterward, sitting in the back room of the bookstore over coffee, the way she'd told her things since the day Simone had knocked on her door in the snow. She said she'd gone into the storage room after everyone left and cried for about 15 minutes and then washed her face and came back out and rearranged the display in the front window. "What did you put in the window?" Simone asked. "Books about people who came back from things," Margaret said. Simone looked at her across the table. "What?" Margaret said, almost defensively. "Nothing," Simone said. "It's right. Tessa Monroe's documents had gone to Naomi Pierce in full and had been entered into the mediation record in a way that made them permanently part of the official proceeding. Tessa had provided a written statement and had been formally deposed. She had not asked Simone for anything beyond the meeting she'd requested, which had happened in a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan in February, 3 weeks after Noah came home from the hospital. Simone had arrived first and ordered tea and waited. Tessa came in looking like someone who had spent several months trying to figure out how to walk into a room, which Simone recognized as an accurate description of what she'd been doing. She sat down. She was composed and direct and did not perform remorse, which Simone respected more than performance would have been. "I knew he was married," Tessa said. "I knew you were pregnant. I told myself stories about it that made it easier, and I knew I was telling stories." She kept her hands on the table where they were visible. "I'm not asking you to understand that. I'm just not going to pretend I didn't know." "I believe you," Simone said. "That's not forgiveness," Tessa said. "No," Simone said, "it's not." Tessa looked at the table. "He told me once that you'd been difficult during the fertility treatments, that you'd been hard to be around, emotional. She paused. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. She looked up. I think you should know that he was very good at making other people's pain into a character flaw. I know, Simone said. I wanted to say that out loud, Tessa said. To you specifically, because you deserve to hear that from someone who was on the other side of it. Simone picked up her tea. She looked at Tessa across the table. I believe your apology, she said. That doesn't mean you get my forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. She held the mug with both hands. But I accept the evidence, and I believe you mean what you're saying. Tessa nodded. They sat for another few minutes without talking, which was uncomfortable and appropriate. And then Tessa left, and Simone finished her tea, and the city moved around her through the coffee shop windows, indifferent and continuous, the way cities are. By October, Simone had rebuilt the professional life she'd put aside, piece by piece during her marriage, with such gradual deliberateness that she'd hardly noticed the accumulation of the loss until she was standing at the edge of it. She opened an independent consulting practice, hospitality financial analysis, specifically the kind of work she'd been trained for and was genuinely good at, the kind she'd been telling herself for 6 years she could return to whenever she chose without acknowledging that choosing required first believing she still had the right to choose. She had 3 clients by November. She worked from the apartment with Noah in a bassinet beside her desk in the mornings, and with a part-time nanny in the afternoons, and there were days when the logistics of it were genuinely hard, and days when Noah was impossible to settle, and days when a client call ran long while the baby was crying in the next room, and she had to apologize, and the apology cost her something, and she made it anyway and kept going. Those were not the days that broke her. The days that almost broke her were the quiet ones, the evenings when Noah was asleep and the apartment was still and she sat with her tea, and the particular weight of 32 years of being herself, of knowing everything she now knew, of understanding with a clarity that had no mercy in it, exactly how long she had stood inside a diminished version of her own life and called it stability. Those evenings she allowed herself to sit with it. Then she got up and went to bed. Then she got up in the morning. That was the whole of it. December came back around the way December always does, and Simone drove up to Vermont with Noah strapped in the car seat behind her, 7 months old and large, and aggressively interested in everything within reach, including the car seat strap and his own feet, and the small stuffed elephant Aunt Patricia had sent from Georgia as a proxy for the visit she was planning in January. Margaret had decorated the bookstore for the season and strung lights in the window and put up a handwritten sign that said, "Extended holiday hours, come in out of the cold," which Simone had seen on the website 11 months ago in a different life, and which had been, in whatever indirect way these things work, part of why she'd gotten in Gerald's car. She carried Noah through the bookstore door, and Margaret looked up from behind the counter, and her face did the thing it did every time she saw Noah, which was a complicated, involuntary thing, involving his resemblance to Charles. He looks more like him every time, Margaret said. I know, Simone said. It's going to get harder to explain to people. I'm not explaining it to anyone, Simone said. He's your nephew. That's all anyone needs. Margaret came around the counter and took Noah from her, which Noah allowed with the magnanimous tolerance of an infant who had decided he liked this particular person. And Margaret held him against her shoulder, and he grabbed a fistful of her hair with the focused determination of someone who had been planning this specific action and was pleased with the execution. Ow, Margaret said pleasantly. He does that, Simone said. They closed the bookstore early that afternoon and drove to the farmhouse that Margaret had rented for the Christmas dinner, because the back room of Clearwater Books seated 4 comfortably, and there were going to be more people than that. Margaret had sent an invitation to 3 Cross family members, Vincent's Aunt Patricia, a cousin named Dolores, who'd exchanged emails with Margaret after the mediation made her existence known, and a great-uncle named Samuel, who was 84, and had known Charles as a young man, and had wept when he learned Margaret existed. They were all there when Simone and Margaret arrived. Patricia hugged Simone in the doorway before she'd taken her coat off, the long, uncompromising hug of a woman who had a lot of ground to cover and intended to cover it all at once. I should have said something sooner, Patricia said into Simone's hair. I knew something was wrong, I told myself it wasn't my business. It's okay, Simone said. It's not, Patricia said. But we're here now. That was enough. The table was set for 8, and the 8th chair Margaret had placed it at the corner, neither at the head nor lost at the far end, just present among the others, was empty when dinner started. Nobody remarked on it. They ate and talked, and Samuel told stories about Charles that none of the others had heard, the young man version, the one who'd had nothing, and built something from a genuine belief that a handshake meant something. Noah sat in a bouncer on the floor and watched the ceiling lights, with the solemn attention of someone conducting a serious study, and Patricia kept reaching down to touch his cheek between bites, and Dolores, who was 40 and frank, and had driven from Boston, and seemed entirely at ease with the strangeness of the gathering, told Margaret she had her grandfather's nose, which was Charles's father, which made Margaret put down her fork for a moment. He has family, Margaret said. I have family. You always did, Dolores said simply. Vincent just put himself between it and you. At 8:15, headlights crossed the window. A car in the driveway. The table went a degree quieter. Margaret got up and went to the door. She opened it before he knocked. Vincent stood on the porch in his good coat, his hair slightly damp from the Vermont cold, carrying his father's wooden box with both hands. He looked like a man who had spent the drive rehearsing something and had decided on the way up the porch steps to put it away. He looked at his Aunt Patricia through the open door. Patricia looked at him. She did not get up. Come in out of the cold, Margaret said. He came in. He set the box on the entry table, not in the room, not yet at the threshold, and took off his coat. He went to Patricia, and she looked at him for a long moment with the specific look of a woman who has loved someone their whole life and been disappointed by them, and is deciding, again, what to do with both of those things simultaneously. She held out her hand. He took it. She held it briefly, then let go. That was all. He said hello to Samuel and Dolores, and they responded with the careful warmth of people who were willing to try and hadn't decided yet what trying would look like. He looked at Simone. She held his gaze without hostility and without warmth, the look of two people who share something permanent and are learning what they owe each other because of it. Noah's on the floor, she said. He went to where Noah was in the bouncer and crouched down. Noah looked at him. He was 7 months old and could not have understood what he was looking at, but he looked at his father with the particular focused attention of an infant who is deciding whether a new face is interesting. And he decided it was, and he made a sound that was somewhere between a syllable and not, and reached toward Vincent's face with one open hand. Vincent let him reach. He stayed crouched there for a moment, just letting his son's small hand find his face and pat it with the exploratory imprecision of an infant who is still learning how hands work. His eyes went wet. He pressed them closed briefly. He pressed them open. He's got your forehead, he said without looking up. His eyes are your father's, Simone said. The sentence landed in the room, and Margaret, from the other side of the table, heard it and looked at her plate and then at the ceiling, and then at the empty chair in the corner. Vincent followed her gaze to the chair. He understood what it meant. He went to the entry table. He picked up the wooden box. He carried it to Margaret. He set it in front of her without a speech, without a preface, without the framing language that was second nature to him. Just put it down in front of her on the table. Margaret looked at it. She looked at him. The photographs, he said. The letters. The pen. The documents my father signed. His voice was level and scraped down to something real. You should have had all of this 3 years ago. I have no reason that covers the gap. He stopped. I'm giving it to you now. No conditions. No attorneys, no agreement. It's yours. Margaret put both hands on the box. She didn't open it. Not yet. When you came to my store, she said. When you put that check on my counter. Did any part of you feel anything? He stood there. Yes, he said. What? She said. Afraid, he said. I felt afraid of what it would cost me to do the right thing. He held her gaze. That's not a justification. It's an answer. Margaret looked at him for a long time. She moved his empty chair 6 inches closer to the table. Not an embrace. Not forgiveness. Not anything that cleaned the record. Just 6 inches. Just the minimum distance that allowed him to sit at the table she had set for 8. He sat down. The dinner resumed. It was not a beautiful evening. In the way that things are beautiful in movies, the way light falls perfectly, and music swells, and everyone finds the words they needed. It was effortful and occasionally awkward, and Samuel told a story that went on too long, and Dolores laughed too loudly at one point, and Vincent sat at the corner of the table saying very little, eating what was put in front of him, answering when spoken to, and occasionally looking at Noah on the floor with an expression that Simone didn't try to name. Patricia helped with the dishes without being asked. Margaret let her. Simone sat with Noah in her lap after dinner, in a chair near the window, watching the snow that had started falling over the Vermont dark, and she was aware of being in the room with all of it, the loss. The year that had passed through her like weather, the things she'd built back piece by piece with her own hands. The son on her lap, who was heavier than he'd been a month ago, and would be heavier still next month, and was going to keep becoming himself at a rate she was going to find both wonderful and alarming for the foreseeable future. She thought about the woman she'd been 1 year ago, standing at a penthouse window, watching snowflakes drift past because she needed something to look at that wasn't her own face. She thought about Gerald's car, in the dark. She thought about Margaret's door opening. She thought about the brass keys and the letter and the fluorescent lights of a Vermont hospital, and the sound of Noah's heartbeat filling a room where two women who had been erased by the same man found each other in the snow. She thought about how none of it had been inevitable. Every step had required a choice. She had made the choices. She looked down at Noah, who had fallen asleep against her chest with his mouth slightly open and his fist curled against her collarbone. His breath was warm through her sweater. He smelled the way infants smell, which was the only thing she could think of that was genuinely indescribable, and she'd given up trying to describe it. Margaret appeared beside her. She stood at the window and looked at the snow. "Are you okay?" she asked. Simone thought about the word okay. She thought about what it covered and what it didn't. "I'm somewhere better than okay," she said. "I don't know what the word is for it yet." Margaret looked at Noah asleep on her chest. "He's going to need to know the whole story someday," she said. "I know," Simone said. "All of it. All of it," Simone agreed. "When he's old enough, we tell him the true one." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Your father-in-law built this case," she said. "All of it. The keys, the letters, the attorney, the drive. He built it and put it in different hands, and waited for someone to come looking." She watched the snow. He knew it would take more than one person. He knew the right people would find each other, Simone said. He was betting on strangers, Margaret said. He was betting on women he thought were smart enough to work it out, Simone said. She looked at her. He was right. Margaret almost smiled. Almost. Across the room, Vincent was listening to Samuel tell another story, really listening this time, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. And Samuel was talking with his hands in the way old men do when they're telling something that mattered once and matters again in the telling. And Dolores was passing the cookies she'd brought from Boston. And Patricia was drying a dish in the kitchen doorway and watching all of it with an expression that was the closest thing to contentment that this room could reasonably hold tonight. Simone looked at all of them. This strange, particular, imperfect arrangement of people who had been made into a family by a series of choices, some deliberate, some desperate, some made in the dark in moving cars, and were now sitting in a farmhouse in Vermont eating cookies while the snow came down. She hadn't won because someone else lost. She hadn't won because Vincent was destroyed. She hadn't needed a rescue. She had walked into the dark with a letter and a key and 11 years of professional instincts she'd been told to quiet, and she had found the people holding the other pieces, and she had assembled what a dying man had left for someone like her to assemble, and she had come out the other side holding her son. She looked down at Noah. He slept on, warm against her chest, entirely unaware that he had already survived the most complicated year of his life. She reached into the bag at her feet. She pulled out a small ornament wrapped in tissue paper, the one she'd bought almost 13 months ago, in a moment of uncomplicated happiness that had turned out to be real even though everything surrounding it had not been. She unwrapped it. Noah's first Christmas, a small ceramic disc with a little hand painted on it. The kind of thing you hang on a tree every year for the rest of your life, as evidence that someone was small once. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at Margaret. "Help me find the tree," she said. There was a small tree in the corner of the room, modest, strung with white lights, that someone had plugged in before dinner. Margaret led her to it, and Simone stood with Noah, still against her chest, and found a branch at her eye level, a sturdy one, and hung the ornament there. It turned slowly once on its hook, stopped. Noah slept through it. Margaret stood beside her and looked at the ornament on the branch. Next year, Margaret said, "He'll be able to hang it himself." "He'll break it," Simone said. "Probably," Margaret said. "That's fine." Simone looked at the ornament. She thought about next year. She thought about the year after that. She thought about Noah at 2 and at 5 and at 17, growing up knowing that his mother had faced something enormous and had not disappeared into it, had not allowed herself to be managed or erased or rewritten into someone easier to dismiss, had stood in the wreckage of the life she'd thought she was building, and found, in the ruins, what she'd actually been building all along herself, solid and known and fully present, requiring no one's permission to take up space. She thought about that. She held her son. Outside, the snow kept falling over Vermont, steady and indifferent and clean, covering everything in the patient, democratic white of a world that keeps moving, regardless, that holds its ground under the weight of whatever comes down on it, and waits and holds, and in the morning is still there.